We turn now to the story of the Cuban prisoners who are holding hostages at this hour in 2 federal detention centers. As we reported earlier, Cuban refugees rioted and took hostages at the Atlanta detention center today. Meanwhile, the stalemate continued in a Louisiana prison, where Cubans rioted and took hostages last Saturday. The riots apparently were touched off by a treaty announced last Friday between the United States and Cuba. The treaty calls for the return to Cuba of a group of so-called undesirables, most of whom have been imprisoned in the U.S. since they arrived in the 1980s Mariolito boat lift. Late this afternoon at a Justice Department press conference, Attorney General EDWIN MEESE announced a temporary hold on any prisoners being returned.
On behalf of the United States government, I have offered to declare a moratorium on the return of the Cuban nationals to Cuba with reference to those Cubans who came to the United States in 1980 via the port of Mariel and who have been declared ineligible to enter the United States legally. This offer includes all such Cubans detained in the United States. The purpose of this moratorium is to permit a full, fair, and equitable review within the laws of the United States of each individual's status with respect to his eligibility to remain in the United States. These offers are made in light of the fair and humane treatment of the federal correctional officers and an expectation that those officers will continue to be treated fairly and safely, and that they and all detainees will be safely released without delay. The purpose of this statement is to restore order, to protect the safety of all persons involved, including those detained, and to assure fair treatment. By fair treatment, I include how the detainees will be handled if the uprisings end immediately. All will be treated properly, and there will be no unlawful reprisals. I hope that all of those who are presently involved in these disturbances will realize that the current matters, the current actions that are taking place there, will not help anyone and could result in serious harm to the individuals involved. Therefore, their best course is to accept this offer and the fair treatment that it guarantees.
The effect of the Justice Department's moratorium on the prison situations in Georgia and Louisiana is still unknown. In all, some 2,500 of the Cubans now held in American prisons stand to be deported. In a moment, we will debate the fate of these people. But first, we want to show you a report that our correspondent Kwame Holman filed for the NewsHour last year. A report that focused on the Cubans held in the federal detention center in Atlanta, where the riot started today.
This is the 85-year-old Atlanta Federal Penitentiary. Once considered so outdated, it was scheduled to be closed in 1978. But today, it's as crowded as ever, not with Americans, but with Cubans. Many of these Cubans spend their days in prison by earning a few cents an hour, making gloves, brooms, and canvas bags for use by the U.S. government. They are illegal immigrants from the 1980 Mariel boat lift. All of the Cubans here are being held indefinitely by the Immigration Service. The government says they are dangerous criminals who should be deported back to Cuba. It is true that most of the men here have committed crimes in America, crimes ranging from major felonies to minor violations of halfway house rules. But almost all of them already have served time in state jails for their crimes. They were brought to the Atlanta pen afterwards by the Immigration and Naturalization Service. Craig Raynsford is Associate General Counsel of the INS.
Why is it then necessary to detain them after they've served a state sentence?
Because they have demonstrated a propensity for violence. Many of these individuals are repeat offenders of violent crimes.
Under an agreement reached with Fidel Castro in December 1984, most of these men would have been back in Cuba instead of in a U.S. penitentiary workshop.
Buenos días, Cuba. Está escuchando Radio Martí en el aire hoy.
But the Reagan administration began flooding Cuba's airwaves with Radio Marti, a product of the U.S. government. Castro retaliated by canceling the deportation deal. So the Cuban government won't take them back. Congressman Robert Kastenmeier has written a report critical of the government's policy toward the Cuban detainees.
We cannot just hold them in intolerable conditions in a maximum security prison merely because they are foreign nationals and have no status in this country. They'd be better off to be U.S. prisoners because they would have a term to serve and then they would be entitled to release under our system. But as it is now, they're serving indeterminate sentences, you might say, for having come to this country, as many other Cubans did, illegally.
So these men have been in limbo. No deportation, little hope of release. The level of violence here is among the highest in a federal prison. Over 100 Cubans have attempted suicide. Hundreds more have mutilated themselves, according to prison officials. For 15 months, Maximo Martinez has shared a 10 by 20-foot cell with 7 other men in the Atlanta pen.
What did it say? The animal live more better than these people over here.
Animals live better than these people over here.
In my life, I don't see...
In my life, I've never seen jails like this.
Maximo Martinez served 4 months in a San Francisco area jail for drug possession. After he was released, the Immigration Service took him into custody and brought him to Atlanta.
What do you think every time my family come to see me, my wife explained it to me?
Every time my family comes to see me, my wife tells me, I don't have money. My kid needs this. Lolita needs this. I can't help them. What do you think people feel when their family leaves here?
Your mind go crazy?
Your mind goes crazy because it gets too much on your mind. But does immigration understand this? Or do Americans understand this? I don't know.
He has no violence on his record. Like I said, the only thing that is on his record is, well, the possession of the cocaine, which he did for 6-month sentence he served for.
To be closer to her husband, JOAN Martinez came to Atlanta a year ago. She brought their 3 children.
Even in Cuba, it was just for refusing to go into Castro's army. So, you know, he's not violent. He's always worked, you know. He's always held a job. And they make them out to be so hardcore criminals. I don't think he's violent. He hasn't never been violent with me.
I didn't know how to my record any problem from nobody.
I have no record of any problem. I've never had a gun, never had anything. No knife, no nothing.
Armando Maya received a suspended sentence for cocaine possession in San Francisco. He has been in Atlanta 2 years.
People come and one mistake and pay and pay.
People make one mistake, and they pay and pay and pay 3, 4, 5 times, and nobody can stand that. Everybody sometime in his life makes a mistake, and everybody gets a second opportunity.
Armando Maya and Maximo Martinez typify the debate about the Cubans here and nearly 1,000 more in other INS facilities. Are these men all violent criminals who would pose a threat to society if released? We asked Craig Raynsford about Maximo Martinez and Armando Maya.
We did, at your request, review the 2 individual cases that you had submitted to our public relations office, and we do find that both of these individuals have a lengthy list of the arrest and charge of violent crimes while they were paroled out into the United States.
We checked with San Francisco officials and found that several arrests for violent crimes were attributed to the name Maximo Martinez. But officials there warned us that it is likely that that record was for several men with the same name. Maximo Martinez has no record of violence in the 15 months he's been in the Atlanta pen. The record was clearer for Armando Maya. No charges for anything other than the drug possession and no violence in his 2 years in Atlanta.
It just says the judge has discretion.
These men are lawyers with the Atlanta Legal Aid Society. They are suing the government, charging that the Cubans are being held arbitrarily and should be given access to hearings. Attorney Bill Thompson.
We believe that there are several hundred people at a minimum held out there right now who do not have violent histories and who a fair analysis of the facts in their case would not lead to the conclusion that that individual is in fact dangerous. Those types of people we think should be released.
The Cuban supporters say the confusion about what these men have or haven't done, both before their arrival here and after, could be solved by giving each of them individual hearings. Hearings like the ones the Immigration Service had in place until 2 years ago.
Between 1981 and 1984, the government did have in place a system called the Attorney General's Status Review Plan, under which agents of INS reviewed individual files, individual cases, and in fact recommended release for up to 2,000 individuals who did in fact gain their release during that period.
When we asked Craig Raynsford about those hearings, he would only repeat his assertion that the Cubans have had ample opportunity to live free in America.
I'm talking about what the lawyers for the Cubans are seeking, which is a parole hearing, if you will, an opportunity for the detainee to say, this is what I think I am prepared to do, this, that, and the other.
Well, the individuals, okay, with you're talking about parole hearings, the individuals have had the opportunity for parole review, as I indicated to you, as they come into the system. They are reviewed as well by our district director as to their past behavior and activities. As you note from my earlier comments, all but 250 to 300 of these people have been out on the street. So they are coming in at different rates, and they're coming in from different locations, and each of them has a different background.
Kastenmeier says there also are domestic political problems with paroling more Cubans.
They also do not want to accept any responsibility for any future actions of anybody presently being detained that may end up in some additional crime or violent activity in some part of the country. So they're taking the easy solution, and that is sort of throwing away the key and sweeping this whole question under the rug, hopeful that no one will pay any attention.
Since that report was filed, MAXIMO Martinez and Armando Maya were transferred to the Federal Detention Center in Oakdale, Louisiana. There was no word on whether they were involved in this weekend's uprising there. Joining us now to look further at the issues raised by today's riots are two lawyers with very different views. Dan Stein, Executive Director of the Immigration Reform Law Institute, and Arthur Helton, who has represented a number of Mariolitos in court and in immigration proceedings, as director of the Political Asylum Project of the Lawyers Committee for Human Rights. Mr. Helton, I'll begin with you. What do you think this offer of a moratorium that the Attorney General made today means? We were told in late wire reports that it's contingent on the safe release of all the hostages.
Well, I think it's an auspicious development. In effect, I think you should